In this video, I'll be discussing chapter 14, which is on effective delivery. So we're going to begin by looking at our PowerPoint. And the first thing we want to do when we're giving public speeches is we want to aim for a conversational style. Although there's a time and place to be very formal and stiff at a podium with everything rehearsed or even already written out for us, the goal of this class is to aim for that conversational style where it's not so monotone or so robotic. So our book tells us that there are four different types of public speaking. The first one's impromptu. Impromptu speaking is the kind of speaking where you have little or no preparation. It's the kind of speaking that I do as a teacher when someone raises their hand and asks me a question that I'm not expecting, but I have to respond. Even if I don't answer the question, I still have to respond and explain why I'm not going to answer that question. Impromptu speaking also happens when we give job interviews and they ask a question and we're expected to answer. Or we could see a press conference where someone's asked a question from a reporter and that speaker has to come up with some type of answer, even if they don't answer the question directly. The second type of speaking is extemporaneous, and extemporaneous speaking is the kind of speaking that we do in speech class. It's where you have a prepared speech, you've had a chance to practice, you're allowed to have notes with you, but the entire speech is not written out for you. So it bridges the gap. There's more planning than impromptu, but it feels more spontaneous and more conversational than a manuscript or a memorized speech. So the third one is a manuscript speech. Manuscript speeches are usually given for extremely important events where it's important for the speaker to say things exactly. Sometimes at school board meetings, portions of the meeting might be scripted, that they're actually reading off of something. When someone gives an official statement, maybe an official statement from a governor or the White House releases an official statement. Oftentimes, those are manuscript speeches. You might even see little things off to the side, which are called teleprompters, and sometimes it's a TV screen on the floor, but usually they're up here because the speaker can look to one side or the other to read the script without their whole head going down to read their script. So you will sometimes see that if you see a faraway shot of a professional speaker, that's what those are on each side of the podium. Manuscript speeches are used for extremely important events where we have to be sure that the wording is absolutely correct and we don't divert from the message. But manuscript speeches can be challenging because if everything is scripted word for word, sometimes we have the tendency to want to just race through the script real fast, and we tend to talk too fast. It can also be monotone, that we have less gestures, that we're just kind of reading, and you can tell the difference when someone's just reading the speech to you versus really presenting the speech to you. And then the fourth type of speaking is memorized. The only place I've seen memorized at Union Local High School is FFA when they do the Creed speech. They actually memorize the Creed, and then there is a public speaking competition through FFA where people will recite the Creed from memory. Again, a memorized speech can be difficult because you also have to still project that air of spontaneity, that air of conversational quality, and it can be more difficult. Again, sometimes people do tend to race through memorized speeches, and for some people, if they lose their space or their place in the memorized speech, they almost have to go back to the last main talking point to pick up where they left off. So next we're going to talk about the different contexts that can affect your delivery of a speech. So in the first picture, you see Barack Obama, two presidents ago, and you see him at a podium, and you also see him just standing on the stage holding a microphone. Now, there are a couple different things that are emphasized here. In the first example, where we have him at the podium, more of his body's hidden. We can only see him, right, kind of, chest up. So when you're speaking at a podium, you have to be very conscious that your gestures have to be higher. Just like right now, if I make all my gestures at waist level, you might kind of see the top of my arms flapping around, but you can't tell what I'm doing with my hands. So when I do have, whether for me a video camera or for you a podium blocking off part of the view of my body, I have to be conscious to bring those gestures up higher so that my audience can actually see them. Sometimes when you're speaking at a podium, there'll be a microphone, and that can limit the range of motion that you have as you're speaking. You may have to stay within a certain radius of that microphone for the microphone to pick up your voice. Um, Other times, when we have a handheld microphone, as you see in the other picture, you're free to walk around and to engage more. And you probably have noticed that the teachers who stand at the front of the room at their desk or behind a podium, it's easier to get off task and kind of hide from them than it is the teachers who walk around and kind of walk down through the rows and between the aisles while they're speaking. And that's actually a trick that teachers are taught when they're training to become teachers, is to use physical proximity of their body to engage students. And we're taught to take a little walk and stroll next to the students who seem to be not focused and not on task. And by moving our body closer to them, it makes them more engaged in the speech. So a speaker who is standing on stage with a microphone has the ability to walk to this side and walk over to that side and walk a little bit into the crowd, right? And then kind of come back a little bit. You might notice this in your religious leaders as well. I know at church, I've seen some speakers who stay at the pulpit and they stay kind of behind a podium type structure and they never leave. And I've seen other religious leaders who actually wander and start to walk down the aisle and come back. And they tend to be more engaging than the ones who stay far away off in one place. So that's one thing to consider. Another one is the size of your audience and the size of the room that you're delivering your speech in. If you're delivering a speech in the auditorium, unless you have a very, very loud voice, you're probably going to need a microphone. Another thing that you have to think about when you're presenting in a very large space is you have to alter the size of your visual aids. So the visual aid that you use for the classroom might not be sufficient when you project it in an auditorium. So oftentimes a PowerPoint will be projected on an even larger screen when you're in an auditorium type setting. But if you're thinking about actual objects, if you were going to present that speech on how to make brookies and we were in the classroom, the actual objects are plenty large enough for us to see. But if we presented that same speech in the auditorium, the people in the back row would not be able to see us pouring vanilla into a little teaspoon and pouring it into the bowl. So in that case, we might be more effective if we had a camera feed and then projecting that image of us onto an even larger screen. So think like when you're at stadiums, right? And you might see a larger picture of the thing that you're actually watching live in person so that you can see the details better. We also have to think about what the volume is going to be, as well as proximity. So your availability to walk around the room and to move varies based on how things are structured. And even if you move into a room, you want to be careful not to move too far into a room that then your back is to some audience members, because every time you turn your back to audience, your voice is projecting in the opposite direction of your viewers or your audience, and that can affect their hearing and their ability to listen to your message. So you do have to be conscious of that, that you don't walk too far, that then people have to make the choice to really turn around backwards to see you, and possibly not be able to hear you as well. We also have special considerations when we're presenting outside. When we present outside, there are a lot of variables that we can't control. For one, the weather. If it's cold and people are bundling up, sometimes when it's windy, it can blow our hair, can blow our clothes, and affect our physical appearance. Wind can also blow into a microphone and make a whooshing sound that can be distracting to your audience. You also have to worry about things like if it's really hot, you might be sweating. So, how you dress appropriately if you're going to be standing in a hot location. Depending on how you're facing, the sun might be in your eyes, but you don't want to wear sunglasses because that would create an obstruction with your eye contact. Or you might be positioned in a way where the sun is to your back, but your whole audience is squinting, right, and shielding their eyes trying to see you. So all of those things can be factors, as can background noise. If there's a big semi truck, and it actually looks like there's one maybe rolling by in the background of this picture, right? If they hit the brakes and it's making a really loud background noise, you may even have to pause and wait for that distraction to end. Or if a bee starts buzzing around your head, you can start going like this, or are you going to try and ignore it? We saw Mike Pence. Now this was indoor, but during the vice presidential debate, there was a moment when a fly landed on Mike Pence's head. And since he has that really white gray hair, it was just kind of crawling around on his head. And, he didn't try and flick it or shake his head or do anything. But then everyone knows the fly, right? And it became a meme and it became a big joke after the fact. So, there are these extra variables when we're presenting outside that we don't necessarily have to deal with when we're presenting in an inside location. We also have to think about if we have to use a microphone. Using microphones can be a little bit awkward if we're not used to them. Some microphones have like a radio set and they're cordless. And those you have to make sure that you've turned on the microphone part, and there might be a part that's attached to your hip or someplace else that you also have to activate so that the sound works correctly. A lot of times you'll see people tap on the microphone, right, and try and figure out if it's on or not before they start talking. Microphones that have long cords on them can become trip hazards if you're walking around a lot. A lot of people who speak with microphones will hold the other end in one hand just so they have a little bit of that slack and more control about where the end is so that they don't end up tripping over their own microphone. And you also have to be careful about how close you hold it to your face or hold it away from your face. If you know ahead of time that you'll be speaking with a microphone and you don't have experience with this, you may want to ask and see if you can practice with the microphone just so you become more comfortable and you find out how close you need to hold that microphone to your face. Each one's a little bit different. Some of them you have to be directly pointed into it. Some of them take more of, it's almost like a heart shape space around the microphone that will pick up the sound. So if you can, practice with them ahead of time. Um, for note cards, I'm going to record a separate video and post it for you because I want you to see me standing up and see the way that I hold the note cards and how sometimes they're closer to my face, but also how I can drop them down and make them less of a distraction to the audience. So when you do make note cards, my tip is to only have one main idea per note card. And then that way you just know that everything on that card is related to that main idea. I also recommend that you write phrases, not sentences, because if you try and write whole sentences out, it's going to take up more space. You're going to have to cram everything closer together, and it makes it harder to find the main idea. You don't need the word the on a note card to say the first step is. You can just put one period to remind you to say the first step is. Also, treat the note cards as an extension of your hand, or you can set them down so they're out of sight and out of mind. When we're doing demonstration speeches, a lot of people hold their note cards for the beginning, for the introduction, and then they'll set it down on the table as they're delivering the speech because their hands are going to be busy doing the demonstration. Your hands are going to be braiding hair. They're going to be mixing up brookies. They're going to be putting green beans into cans and showing us how to can green beans. They're going to be mixing up dog treats. Um, when you are making your note cards, my recommendation is that you make a set of note cards and you practice your speech with the note cards. And if something isn't flowing the way you want, or you're having trouble finding something on your note cards, or maybe there's something you forgot, get out a new note card and make yourself a new note card. You're going to revise your note cards, practice your speech again, and make sure the note cards are working for you and working the way you want. I often start with one set of note cards, and by the time I'm done and I'm ready to give my speech, usually half, if not more, of my note cards have been changed and revised by the time I actually deliver that speech in front of a live audience. And then the last tip is to make sure that you write large enough and you write in pen. When we're presenting with an overhead and we turn down the lights, if you write in pencil, sometimes the lighting contrast can make pencil hard to read. Also, some of us sweat when we're nervous, and if you're sweating, it can actually rub that pencil and make it blurry or even rub it away into just kind of a gray smear. So I always like to write with a nice, bright, dark pen on my note cards. For effective delivery, I am going to make a separate video of me standing so you can see more of my body. But the elements of effective delivery are to keep that conversational style. So think more like the way comedians or late night talk show hosts talk, right, as opposed to stiff, formal at the podium kind of speaking. We're also going to talk about making effective eye contact. Ideally, effective eye contact is brief moments of direct eye contact with different members of the audience, which is really hard to do on video without actually seeing all of you in the classroom to talk to. But you want to make sure that your eyes are moving around, and you can sometimes cast your eyes a little bit higher when you're making eye contact with people in the back, but then we also cast our gaze downward a little bit when we're making eye contact with people who are in the front rows. We're also going to talk about vocalics, which are the vocal qualities of our presentation. And vocalics has to do with volume, rate, pitch, pause, vocal variety, pronunciation, and fillers. So volume is when a mom yells, "Stop!" Right? That change in volume, right, makes us jump. It alerts us and makes us pay attention. And we can do that in a speech too. We can also use volume to draw our audience in by intentionally lowering our voice. And by softening the voice, it makes everyone kind of lean in and pay extra attention. Anytime the voice gets louder or softer than it had been, that's a signal to the audience that something important is happening and they should pay attention. Rate is how fast you talk. Usually, when we're excited about things, we talk a little bit more quickly. If you really want to emphasize an important point, you slow down. And you can also use pauses to prepare the audience for the most important point. Pitch has to do with how high or low your voice sounds. And we use pitch when we read to little kids. When we read The Three Little Bears and we say, "Someone's been eating my porridge," and then we have our Papa Bear voice, "Someone's been eating my porridge." When we manipulate, right, our voice to make it sound higher or lower, that's what we mean by pitch. Vocal variety is mixing all those things together. It's that combination of different rates, of different pitches, of different volumes, and it's what makes the presentation more interesting to listen to. It's basically the opposite of monotone. Pronunciation will not be as big of a deal for this audience because we're all native speakers of English. But for those who speak English as a second language, accents and certain word sounds in English can be very difficult for foreign speakers. Sometimes, though, we do have problems with our pronunciation that we don't completely finish the ends of words. And if any of you have ever sung in choir, you may have had teachers really emphasize putting the ends on words, making sure you pronounce all the way to the D sound at the end of walked instead of wah, without that ending on it. And then fillers are words or phrases that we use to fill time and space. They usually happen because we don't know what to say. And the more you practice a speech, the more prepared you are and comfortable with the content, the less you're going to have fillers. And fillers will also improve as you become more experienced as a speaker. Any word or phrase has the potential to become a filler. It can be words like and, like, you know, and, fillers are, they're like, when, like you don't know what you want to say, and then, like you find yourself, pausing and, like, and then like those are fillers. Again, any word or brief phrase has the potential to be a filler. So the word like doesn't always necessarily mean it's a filler. It's the way you use it, either in that use the word and then dead space or use the word with that trailing off. And like, then I went to the store and like, I got some stuff because it was like gonna snow really bad outside. Okay, either one could be used as a filler. Ultimately, we want to try and eliminate those. In speech, you're going to have it. If you're impromptu speaking, you're going to have more fillers than extemporaneous, and extemporaneous is going to have more fillers than a manuscript speech or a memorized speech. So the goal isn't necessarily to eliminate every filler because that can be almost impossible if it's not a scripted speech, but the goal is to reduce the number of fillers to a level that it's not distracting to the audience, or something where people start making little tick marks every time you say the word like. And I'm sure all of you have done that at some point in your life to a teacher or to a speaker. The next section that this chapter talks about is body language. So body language involves our body movement, and I'll show you that in more detail on a video. It also involves our facial expressions as well as our posture. So you are going to be practicing all of these as you're preparing to give your first speech. My recommendation would be to practice standing up rather than sitting down, so that you can practice body movement. You can practice raising your arms up, gesturing. If you have visual aids, you might have to point to a visual aid. So when you're practicing, make sure you practice with your visuals. If you're practicing a PowerPoint presentation, you might not have a projector to practice projecting it, but I would practice clicking through the slides on your Chromebook or your iPad. Make sure you time yourself. We already learned from the icebreaker speech whether we tend to talk too fast or too slow. So take that into consideration and plan, either over plan or under plan accordingly. Audio and video record yourself. Your iPad has a camera on it. So you can take that iPad and you can prop it up maybe on a dresser. I've been known to open up my kitchen cabinets and prop it on a shelf to get it high enough that it's back far enough that I can see my face. But you can set that up in a bookshelf somewhere maybe and record yourself and see what you look like and see what your body movement looks like, what your eye contact looks like, etc. Ask for feedback. You can share your video with someone. You can perform your speech in the living room for a family member and ask for feedback. You can also ask for feedback from Ms. Carmichael and your classmates. Think about what your three goals were. You may want to create some kind of questionnaire that you ask your audience at the end of each speech and you track throughout our semester together. And then finally, make sure you practice multiple times over multiple days. Practicing over multiple days lets it kind of sink in more deeply than just cramming it really fast 3 times the morning before. Also, if you're just trying to cram in a couple really fast repetitions, you might have a tendency to race through the speech and to cut things out just because you're trying to get 3 practices in. I usually practice until I start to feel pretty comfortable with what's on my note cards, how I'm going to use my visual, and what I'm going to say next. I would recommend for the speeches and the length speeches we're giving, I would recommend 3 to 5 practices at home. So depending on when you have the final speech ready with the visual aid, you might practice twice a day for a couple days, and then practice again the day before the speech. So I will record some separate videos for you, showing you in more detail how to speak with note cards and also expand on some of those elements of body language.